ideology, this fascism. So one
Not
of
that we're
the
being pessimistic or anything.
no, it's a real happy stream. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about is this idea that you hear of institutional racism or systemic racism. And that's one of the things I'm hearing. So, just for those of you to get an idea of what I'm talking about, when I'm debating people on the left, which I did a lot of debates here last week, supposedly I'm doing one again tomorrow, one of the things they want to say is they can't really justify that these sort of protests or riots are over just the death of George Floyd. And the reason is they can't prove that the person who killed George Floyd was racist. There's no proof. And when you look at unarmed black men being killed by police last year, for example, depending on what numbers you look at, we had between 9 and 15. Many of the, just because you're unarmed doesn't mean that the shooting wasn't justified. For example, one was an attempted vehicular homicide on a police officer. The cop shot. Technically, that was him shooting someone who was unarmed. Another was a black female cop who was being choked out by a black man and was going to die, and so she shot and killed that black man. So even still, in a country where 5 to 7,000 black men a year are killed in homicides, 9 being killed by police unarmed is, although each one would be tragic, it's not enough to prove some sort of racism. So what they claim is it's systemic racism. It's not that this individual cop that killed George Floyd admitted like, hey, I'm a racist, I'm killing George Floyd because he's black, but it's because the entire country and the institutions are set up to be racist. Now, there's an argument to be made that that could have been true back in the 50s before the civil rights movement. But here's my question to you, Rational. Would you say that the institutions, and they're not just government institutions, but also cultural institutions, such as the entertainment industry, such as Silicon Valley, such as the media, such as academia, not just in the United States, but all throughout the Western world, which side would you say those institutions tend to be on politically, the left or the right?
Well, I would say that obviously they're on the left, and they are for the most part anti-white. And the obvious example to push back on that is you have a look at what happened in the United Kingdom. Specifically, you look at things like Rotherham and Rochdale and Telford and all of those things where you had Muslim gangs that were engaging in some of the most horrendous activities that it's possible for human beings to engage in, involving young girls. And because most of those girls were white, no one did anything. The police refused to do anything because they didn't want to be called racist. The political class wouldn't do anything because they didn't want to be called racist. You had, counsellors and psychologists and child welfare officers and all of that, all of those people. And overwhelmingly, they were on the left. Overwhelmingly, they were from the Labor Party, and they were just allowing. And you look at some of the stories, and they were horrific. A young girl, 11 or 12, being abused by 50 men in a night. A young girl who had a tail her tongue nailed to a table and was raped in that condition, right? It's horrific stuff, but no one wanted to speak because overwhelmingly the victims were white and overwhelmingly the perpetrators weren't. So I kind of agree in the sense that there is systemic racism, but it's not racism by white people against non-white people. It's kind of gone the other way.
Right, and like one of the things, so if you want to just say, well, the systemic part is just the government. So let's look particularly in that instance you just gave. Law enforcement clearly is part of the government, and it wasn't just the police. Like those stories, for example, Rotherham, Telford, we now know that the police and local politicians knew of that for 30 years. And they kept it silent for 30 years. Now, one of the things I say all the time is if you can't get people in the UK, which is Australia, the UK, Canada, the United States, we're kind of cousins, right? Similar populations, I would say. If you can't get people fired up over that, over thousands of underage girls being gang raped over and over in the most horrendous ways that you could imagine. And how many of those police or how many of those politicians that knew of that have faced criminal prosecution? Zero, to my knowledge.
Yep. Yeah. As far as I know, a few have resigned and a few have been sacked, but overwhelmingly, not much has happened. There was actually I saw a report with, I think it was the top cop in Rotherham who was being grilled about the stuff that went on, and it's really difficult to even find that online now. I went looking for it again on YouTube because I had watched a part of it and I planned on going back to watch the rest. Can't find it now.
Right.
So it's being put down the wormhole. And that kind of thing is concerning. It's worse to talk about the rape of thousands of young white girls than it is to try to stop it. I mean, you have a look at Tommy Robinson. He's persona non grata almost everywhere. because he was one of the people who spoke out against this. And the people that hate Tommy Robinson and call him a Nazi, they didn't believe what he was saying. But then when it came out that this stuff was true and it was right, and he and the things that he was saying were right, they say, oh yeah, but he's still a Nazi.
Yep.
But he was telling the truth, and that's coming from the media, like the BBC. That they hate him, that they've tried to stitch him up and take him out. That the police, that the unbelievable harassment this poor guy gets. Like, I don't know how he does it.
I know.
So yes, again, there is a systemic issue within government agencies and the media as well. I would say that they're far too closely aligned for my liking, but it is pretty much always working against the interests of Western values, Western people, freedom. And this isn't a race thing either, incidentally. No. Like, you have a look at the way people like Candace Owens are treated. Again, it's people who support freedom and people who support Western ideology and people who support Western values are under attack. Freedom is under attack. The free world is on its knees right now. We don't have too many people speaking out on our behalf. So it is absurd to say that the systemic attack is from us against everybody else. It's
right.
The opposite of that,
Well, and what happens is we look at... I'm not going to deny history, particularly here in the United States. Of course, there's a terrible history of abuse of people of certain ethnicities. We could go through... You could take any group, like you could take, for example, mental health issues is one where we've treated people with mental health issues terribly in the history of this country. But several things. One, that's not unique to this country or the West. And at least in the West, people have taken steps to try to end that. Whereas we see these abuses like slavery exist right now. In the world, It exists. But the woke people that are fighting against the U.S. supposedly being a slavery society, they don't have word one to say about the countries that actually do have slaves. Why? Because it doesn't fit their cultural Marxist ideology. Those other countries aren't the U.S. or the West, so they must be victims.
Yeah, and I also think, I'm not sure on what the numbers are, but I would be assuming that there probably would have been more white people who fought to end slavery than there were that owned slaves. Would that be right? Because there's only a very small percentage of people that owned slaves, right? And the slave trade in the US didn't last. How long did it last? It was a couple of 100 years, wasn't it?
Yes.
I'm a bit hazy on the detail.
Yes.
And you have a look at the Islamic world, and it's been going on for 1400 years, and it's still going. And you can find footage, and some of it was horrific. I saw an African slave in a market who wasn't docile enough, and so he was just repeatedly stabbed and just left to bleed out. That's going on in the world now, and that's Muslims doing that to a black guy. And if Black Lives mattered, and I agree that they do, but if BLM thought that Black Lives Matter, they would be looking at that and they would be as angry about that and enraged about that as what I am, right? But it's us that speak out about that stuff. The racists, we're the ones who speak out about that kind of stuff. We are gaslit all the time. It's like, man, it does your head in.
Yeah. Well, you were talking
about.
Yeah, you're talking about Tommy Robinson and the idea of people were more worried that him telling the truth could lead to racism than they were about thousands of people being raped. And the best I've heard this put, one of my favorite comedians is Norm Macdonald, and he has this podcast, and he had this woman on, I can't remember her name, but she's a comedian, very left-wing. And she was just talking about how terrible the United States is and stuff. And Norm Macdonald put it this way, and it's one of the best jokes I've ever heard. He says, yeah, I have this friend whose big fear is that Islamic terrorists will get their hands on a dirty bomb, and they'll unleash it in a massive American city and cause millions of deaths. And his fear is, just think how bad people will treat Muslims after that. And the woman was like, I know, right? And his joke is, you don't even care about the people dying. The entire, and that's the joke he's making, and it goes right over our head. But what a brilliant man to be able to make fun of her while appearing to agree with her. And that's the truth. That's what we see. For example, we talk in the United States about systemic racism that occurred in the 60s. And so we do that to deflect from systemic bigotry. I won't even call it racism, but the systemic bigotry of anyone who doesn't agree with the establishment that's occurring today. For example, we had the governor of Kentucky came out today and said, or yesterday I believe it was, said, we are going to make sure that not one poor black person in this state does not have health care. So what? You're just so screw the poor Asians, Hispanics, whites. What does that mean? Like you could literally point to laws and official government policies in this country that are racist. Affirmative action is racist. Show me the law that is intentionally written to benefit white people. Show me the law that is intentionally written to benefit men. I will argue against that law. Show me the racist in politics. I'll argue against that racist. But I have to continue to believe that because of sins that occurred 200 years ago, that I need, and people that look like me need to be punished today. Not even people that look like me, people that think like me need to be punished today. And how can we explain that 60, 70 years after the civil rights movement, that things are worse now, supposedly because of slavery, than they were when we were closer to Jim Crow and slavery?
Yeah, it's insane, isn't it? Just on that too, there was this thing that I thought was just hilarious. When I watched, you see like, during the segregation, that kind of thing, and you had a bunch of Democrats, angry Democrats getting out and trying to stop black people from eating in certain restaurants. And then you fast forward to, 1 or 2 years ago, and there was Candace Owens sitting in a restaurant trying to eat, and a bunch of angry white people went in there and told her that you can't eat in this restaurant. And I thought, have the Democrats really changed?
Right?
I haven't.
No, none at all.
I just thought that was hilarious.
It is.
Yeah. But we're the racists, though.
Right. Well, then that's it. And I had people
You ain't black.
I had someone in this debate I did the other day. It was supposed to be 4-on-4. It ended up being like 7 on me. Though there was one guy that joined half the time that agreed with me. But other than that, it was basically everyone against me. One of the things
you still won, of course.
I think I did. But one of the things they said was, I don't care about black homicide victims or the plight of the inner city until it could benefit me politically. To which my response is, as usual, you accuse me of exactly what you do. And so again, to go back to a popular film, there was a movie called Thank You for Smoking, which is a great movie. It's basically a movie about debate. Aaron Eckhart plays a lobbyist for the smoking industry, and I think it takes place in the 90s. And at the beginning, they're on a talk show. And so it's him from the smoking lobby, and then there's an anti-smoking activist, and then there's a poor young guy who's dying of lung cancer. And the anti-smoking activist is just like the left, where he's going to stand up and yell and beat his chest and act like he's virtuous. And he says, you, in the smoking industry, you want this young man to die. And Aaron Eckhart stands up and he says, no, I don't. You do. I want this man to live to be 100 years old and smoke 10 packs of cigarettes a day. You're the one who wants him to die, because then you could use him as a token for your political ideology. And that's exactly what's going on with the Black Lives Matter movement. They don't care. They'll tell you, oh, no, we speak out about gang violence. Well, think about it this way. Just look at the percentages. For police to kill as many black people, based on the percentages that they do right now every year, to kill as many black people that die in 1 year at the hands of black-on-black crime, it would take the police 40 years to do just 1 year of black-on-black violence. 40 years. And so if you really cared about black lives, let's just say, well, we just care about them in the United States because we're a U.S. movement, Black Lives Matter. Fair enough, if that's your argument. Wouldn't you be spending 40 times as much effort on the inner cities that are being killed by these homicides? But they don't. They ignore them, or they'll pay lip service to them. And then someone like me, who ran as a Republican and yelled at Republicans that I find it appalling that Republicans don't reach out to inner city communities. I did that. I lost votes because of that. I constantly try to talk to people in the inner city to see things that I could do in my life to make it better. But that's not good enough. I can't talk about that at all, or I'm a racist. That's what aggravates me, to where it's like, no, I swear to you, I don't care about skin color. The fact that we have communities in this country that are basically war zones is unacceptable. That is a failure of our government to allow that to occur. Now, we might disagree on the solutions, me and someone for the left, but I deeply care about that. And to be told by someone who only wants to focus on George Floyd because they could use it as a tool to say, dismantle systemic white supremacy, that I don't care about black people, I'm sorry, I just don't put up with it.
No, and again, I think that is a fundamental and a huge mistake made by the Republicans, because again, I can only speak for me on this, but I do care. When I see people living in poverty and living in squalor, I don't give a crap what their skin color is. I care. You want to help people to be able to help themselves. Like you can't there is that you can't you can't make somebody live, right? But you can give them tools to help them to live.
Right.
And I think it's up to the Republican Party to be going into those places and saying to people, look, these are some of the solutions to the problems. And yeah, look, it may take money, it may take creating social programs or whatever. That's fine. Fix up the schools, for God's sake. Get some people in there that can actually teach. Bring some discipline back into schools. Do what you have to do, but try to actually help these people to get to a point where they can live and where they can be successful. And we have that problem here because we have our Indigenous people who,
right,
their societies are so messed up, and it's difficult to figure out what to do to help them. And one of the things that we have done is just throw money at them.
Right.
Money doesn't work, but it's actually about giving these people a sense of their own value as people. Give them the understanding not only that they're valued, but that we value them as people, because all people should be valued. I'm not sure if you're a Christian or not, but the idea that we're all made in the image of God, so everybody has the same value and the same worth, right? And so if we take that message to those communities, and then we try to help them to be able to help themselves, because ultimately, again, it has to be you. Now, I come out of a pretty bad background. I had some interesting experiences when I was younger, so I know this from experience. Nobody can make you live. You have to find a way to live yourself. People can give you tools to help you to live, right? But they can't live your life for you, right? You have to kind of do it yourself, but people can help you on that path.
Well, and that's
where I think the Democrats where I think the Republicans are missing out.
Right.
They need to be going into those communities with solutions that are going to work, because the Democrat solution is to create more of the problem, and I think they do that deliberately.
Yeah,
just throw money at people.
I agree. And like if you look at like the video I have pinned at the top of my YouTube page is just this little 7-minute video I did where I think the reason the United States was the greatest country ever was that it was the first country in its foundational documents to put the importance of the individual and personal liberty and personal responsibility. People forget that second part. They want all the freedom and liberty, but they forget about the responsibility part, right? You have the freedom to make your choices, but you have to live with the consequences of your choices, right? Like that's the idea. And I agree. Yeah. We're seeing a worldwide push to end that. So let me see what you think about this. This is something I've been kicking around my head. I agree with you. I think that this division is intentional. I think that as long as people in the establishment in the United States and worldwide that have not advocated for the people of their countries for decades, instead they've siphoned wealth from these people, and I can't specifically talk about Australia. I'm assuming it's the exact same there. We elect politicians that promise you all the world, and then it seems like they actually hold their constituents in contempt. That's the way it is in the United States.
Just on that, while I'm thinking about it, we actually had ASIO, which is our intelligence agency, come out and tell us that China had compromised our political system. That's how bad it got. And you know how the Australian people reacted? Meh.
Yeah.
They just went on with their business and kept voting for the same people.
Yep.
Nothing changed. Nothing happened.
Yeah, and that's exactly what... So here's the idea. So I think that it's intentional from the establishment. I talk about that a lot. But I was just thinking of this today. What better way that if you were people in power to assure that you constantly remain in power to make the number one virtue and currency in the world victimhood? Right? You're at top. So you convince everyone below me, oh, you're better than us because you're victims. And being a victim's the best thing that you could be. Now all of a sudden, no one's fighting to get freedom from the people that are oppressing them for the top. Quite the opposite. They're fighting to argue who's the bigger victim. And I see that happening worldwide. And so I say this all the time. I truly mean it. I'm not even blaming. Yes, there is culpability. No matter what your situation is, you're responsible for your own actions. But as a group, can you blame black people in inner cities in America for believing what they do? They've been told for 60 years that the country hates them, basically wants to enslave or kill them, that they're owed everything, everyone's a racist, every bad thing that's ever happened in their life is because they're black. They've been told that generationally. They've been incentivized to have single-parent households, which I talk about this all the time. In 62, Democrat Patrick Moynihan did a report that said it was a national disgrace. 25% of African Americans were born out of wedlock. So 60 years after the war on poverty, we saw that problem, right? Oh, no, wait, throwing money at it's just made it so the number's now 75%. And so you could hardly blame people in these communities that are perpetually told they're a victim and being a victim's a great thing and that everyone owes them everything. If I was born into that community, I would have failed. And that's why I think some of the greatest people on earth are people that came through those communities and still achieved, because how difficult must it be to do that? So I'm not looking at people and saying, oh, these people are worse than me. Quite the opposite. I think there is institutional problems, but it's the opposite of what we're being told. The people that have the institutional power on the establishment left that are currently virtue signaling about Black Lives Matter, they've done nothing but make things worse for the black community for 60 years. Maybe it's time, instead of focusing on race, we focus on people as individuals, we stop celebrating victimhood, and we do what we can to show African Americans, if you really don't like the way this country's going, you know what you do? Bust your ass, prove that you could outcompete these people, and stick it to them that way.
Yeah, and vote Republican. I think
Right.
that would help. Well, not rhino, though. You don't want to be voting for a rhino. You want an actual Republican. So it is an irony that, that it's something that I've noticed with the Democrats. They are remarkably good at creating a problem and then blaming you for it.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like, how do they, like everything, the slavery, the KKK, the Jim Crow, the three strikes law that is incarcerated masses. That was Bill Clinton and Joe Biden, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it's like these guys, they have created all of the problems. The Democrats are responsible for all of it. And yet that somehow they're able to wipe their hands of it and say, but see, we throw all of this money at you and we encourage single parents and we encourage you to live here on welfare and that kind of stuff because we're the good guys and we love you, So it's just, I say this quite a lot. If the black community ever does wake up, it would be a really, really bad day to be a Democrat, because I don't think your life expectancy would be all that long.
Right? Yeah.
Because they've got like all that hundreds of years of rage that black people talk about, all of that sits on the Democrat side of the fence. Well, yeah, obviously it's not to say that every Republican's been a great guy.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like the overwhelming majority of it sits 100% with the Democrats.
Right.
That they have done all of this damage to the black community, and that's a thing that I find so aggravating and makes me angry from even from Australia looking at it. That the anger that I feel towards the Democrat Party, because they are the ones who keep doing this damage. That they want a damaged and dysfunctional and broken black community. I think that's why they highlight people like Michael Brown and George Floyd. They are the kind of black people that the Democratic Party want. They're involved with violent crime. They're involved with things like guns and drugs and that kind of thing. And that is exactly the type of person that they want held up. You have a look at even the kind of culture that they push onto the black community in the US with the rap, the gangster rap, and it's all about guns and drugs and hoes and violence and all that kind of stuff. That's what they want their black community to be, because that is where the Democrat voters come from.
Yep, I totally. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say they don't want success. They don't want to hold up as an example a guy like David Dorn, right? But he was, but he should be held up as being a hero, because he was. He, voluntarily went to protect black people's businesses from people that were looting, and got shot and was just left to die on the road, and it was horrible. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, it was terrible.
That was. Why isn't he held aloft? Because to the people in the media and the Democrats and that kind of thing, that guy's a threat.
Right.
Because he shows that there is a different way that black people can live that is successful and that leads to life.
Right. And the irony is, even the positions we see being pushed right now by the establishment would be disastrous for the inner city community. So the idea of removing police or massively defunding, for example, we see that in LA they did that in the past 2 weeks. Homicides are up 250%. After Ferguson, we saw, for example, in inner city Baltimore, homicides went up about 90%. Because Baltimore police were like, all right, if you say we're the problem, we'll stop going into these neighborhoods. And again, there's this idea of trio. Now, I don't begrudge anyone. I understand that we're all, even though I think that we try to do a better job of kind of researching things from both angles and things like that, to some extent, we're all victims of the people that control the narrative. We're talking about what they want us to talk about. We might take a different side than them, but we're talking about what they want. So you never know. Are you really seeing reality, or are you just seeing what select people are pushing on you? So I get that. And so I'm not begrudging someone for being furious about the murder of George Floyd. I'm not at all. Like, that's fine. I think the racial aspect of it's made to divide us, but fine. You want to protest for George Floyd? You want to have a memorial for him? That's fine. I don't mind that, right? Here's the problem, though, right? We can see that the data doesn't lie. And there is this concept of triage. Triage being, you learn that, I've never been in the military, but this is something you hear often about in the military. Let's say you're a medic in a war zone, and there's someone who's got a bullet in their foot, and there's someone that has a bullet in their chest. You're going to treat the person who is facing the biggest threat first. So you go to the person with the bullet in the chest. That doesn't mean you don't care about the person with the bullet in the foot. You do. You would prefer that they were treated and that they didn't get shot in the foot. Well, it's the same with these problems in the inner city community. I mean, the big threat, I'm sorry to say this, but it's just the data. The big threat when it comes to homicide for black individuals is other black individuals. And it's not even close. It's not even close. And so the fact that you barely want to spend any time on that, but you want to focus on 9 unarmed black people that were killed by the police last year, you're putting, even if you're well-meaning, you're putting your focus in the wrong area. And then what happens is, because you've made it about race, you then end up making the situation 10 times worse, even if all you care about is your own community. Why? Because outsiders that are fascists come in and they start rioting and burning down your city, right? And then they start advocating removing police in your city. And we see, for example, after the Watts riots, after the LA riots, after the Rodney King LA riots, after the Detroit riots, it takes decades for these communities to be built back up. And so what we see is people with a political agenda fostering rage and violence in these communities. And who pays the price? The black community. They're the ones who are paying the price. That's right. Go ahead, I'll leave you respond, and then I got more to say.
It's difficult because the people that are stuck in that environment, it's very hard for them to get out. I listened to Anthony Brian Logan talking about how he kind of moved out of that environment, and it's extremely difficult because he grew up thinking that white people hate him, that white people are against him, that all white people are racist against black people. And so it's very difficult for people that actually want more to leave that environment. At the same time, it's difficult for other people to come in and help to build up the community. So they're just stuck, just sort of twirling around. And again, this is all done by, well, as I see it anyway, that the overwhelming majority of it is done by the Democrat Party and the Democrat media.
I agree.
Yeah, it's.
I mean, but there's certainly
a horrible thing to see. But
let's be honest, there are people on the right in the establishment level that are more than happy to go along with it. Your Mitt Romneys, right? Your Jeb Bushes, like that crowd's more than happy. Mitt Romney doesn't want you to know that he made millions working for Bain Capital, where he predatorily lended to poor people, including black people, charged them absurd interest rates. But none of that matters now, because Black Lives Matter is celebrating him because he came out and said Black Lives Matter. And so what we've set up, again, this is what I'm talking about. The establishment loves this. So you mean, like, one of the craziest images I saw, it just blew my mind, was watching rioters pass Chase Bank, because Chase Bank had a sign in the window that said Black Lives Matter. I mean, this is insanity. If you're in the black community and you want to talk about poverty, why wouldn't you be talking about a bank that actually was criminally charged for predatory lending to the black community? But all they have to do now is put a sign up that says, well, Black Lives Matter. That's it. That's all they have to say. And so what an easy tool. The other thing I wanted to say about this that is unbelievable. So this is happening on a mass scale, but it's also happening on an individual scale to everyone's lives, because in the world of social media, everybody's posting about this. Everybody's got a take, which I don't begrudge anyone their take. But I'm seeing people that now no longer want to talk to me because I'm a racist, or one of the best was because I'm against riots. I have a friend that thinks I'm an extremist because I'm against riots, which is laughable, but okay. Yep. Yeah, so that's how far we came. But I see these people, friends of mine, I see it, people that aren't friends of mine that you just see posting, that are talking about systemic racism and how racist the country is, or how racist the West is, and, as a white person, I'm just ashamed, and, I've benefited, I have privilege because of systemic racism. Words are cheap. If you believe that, give up your wealth. I'm sick and tired of this. I don't believe I'm the beneficiary of systemic racism. I do believe I'm the beneficiary of privilege. In fact, I'll go so far as to say I'm one of the most privileged people that have ever lived. Why? Well, one, because I'm born in this time. No matter where you're at in the world, this is the best time ever to be alive. So the mere fact that you're alive right now puts you as the top 5% of privileged people in the history of the world. Period. Even if you have a really crummy life. Unless you were born like with an absurd terminal illness and you only live, like, that stuff happens and that's tragic, I get it. But other than that, if you're an adult and you're having a conversation, you're one of the most privileged people ever. If you're born in the West or a place like the United States, you're like of the top 1% of the 1%. Even if you're considered poor. And so that's the definition I'm in. Plus, you want to know why else I was privileged? I wasn't born with a terminal illness. I had a family that loved me. My friends and family are great. So I'm one of the most privileged people ever. It has nothing to do with my skin color. The difference would be this. Maybe, like, never mind. I won't even go with that angle. But, so here's the thing, though. If you disagree with me, it's going to be hard to win that debate with me. We're going to go back and forth. And I don't just mean because I'm a good debater. I just mean it's hard to convince people you're evil because of this color of your skin. You've benefited because of the color of your skin. The country is racist. But if you believe it, how horrible of a person are you? Here's the argument these people are making, if you take it out to the logical extension. This country is racist. I have gotten ill-gotten gains in my life because of my race. I'm ashamed of that. A large portion of my wealth and my livelihood is because I'm white. But I'm going to keep it. I'm not going to give it up.
That's right.
Like, that's...
I'm going to make you give up your wealth, but I'm not going to give up mine.
Exactly. It's like, that would be like, picture that, you know, slavery is ended, and you have a bunch of slave owners sitting around going, wow, you're right. That Civil War, that was crazy. We feel really bad we own slaves. It's like, all this wealth we have was a result of slavery. Oh, no. We won't be returning any of the wealth. We're going to keep it, but trust us, we feel bad. And that's what outrages me. This idea, could you do less? Is there anything you could do that is less than saying, oh, well, I think Black Lives Matter? Just shut up. Just shut up. You're not helping the situation. You're doing nothing. And I had one person say, well, I have done stuff. I've donated. I'm like, okay, you're on a computer right now. There are homeless black people. The reason you have access to a computer and they don't is because the country's racist. So give up your computer until you have just enough wealth to basically be living with shelter, pay your bills, and have food on the table. Any other wealth you have after that, if you're white, according to these people, is excess. So give it up. And they won't do it. And that's the idea. You constantly see this with these fascist, Stalinistic type communists, where they prescribe things for everyone else. They stand on their moral soapbox and say, I'm better than you. Oh, if you don't think this way, you're a crappy person. You can see it on TikTok and YouTube. Girls, the young people bawling their eyes out. My parents, they don't believe Black Lives Matter. How horrible are they? I'm so privileged. Like, okay, then give up some of that privilege. You're in the media. You believe systemic white supremacy has affected the media. Quit your job. Give it to a black man. You're in academia. You feel the same way. Quit your job. Give it to a black person. You got a scholarship. You think it's because you're white. Give up your scholarship. Give it to a black person. But no, all these people, when they think it could, the reason you're saying Black Lives Matter, it's because you think that you're getting some sort of social currency. It's not because you actually care about that community, because if you really believed that you've benefited from your skin color and that that's unjust, you would give that benefit away.
Yes, and the sad thing is, I think that they actually do get currency from it, at least for a while. I mean, you do see, the left sort of eating their own, but I don't think that these idiots have actually thought through the long-term ramifications of this. At some point, it's not going to be enough to just give words. And you're exactly right. What these people are telling us to do is going to be demanded of them into the future. And you see that, like they turned on people like J.K. Rowling and who was that moron that played Hermione in the Harry Potter movies.
I know
they turned on her now, and it's like that. So being white is becoming the sin. It's no longer a matter of, these people are just useful idiots for the people that are trying to sow this division at the moment. Their aim is to eliminate white people or put white people in subjugation to them. Right? This is not about equality. This stopped being about equality a very long time ago. Mm-hmm. So I think that these people, it's kind of that that saying about you're just hoping that the crocodile's going to eat you last. You keep throwing everybody else in. That's what they're doing. But you're still going to get eaten. It's a stupid game to play. You play a stupid game and you win stupid prizes.
That's right.
But why play the game? We just people have just got to sort of say, yeah, look, that stuff was wrong. Slavery was wrong. Our history is wrong. Yeah, we've done a lot of bad things. Yes, we do know. I think that we do have a responsibility to help anyone who has a problem, doesn't matter about their race or their color or anything, we have a responsibility, because we want to be a society that is good. And I think my definition of good revolves around how you treat the most vulnerable people in your community. If you treat the vulnerable people like shit, you're not a good community. You're kind of a shitty community, right? So you have a responsibility to try to help people, but that has nothing to do with race. And I absolutely will not apologise for anything that I haven't done. I've never had slaves. So why would I apologise for slavery? I never was involved in genocides against Aboriginal people. I've probably got Aboriginal blood in my family. It's almost a guarantee that there is in there somewhere. But the reality is I just don't care.
Right, me too.
Because race means nothing to me. I just don't care about race. So of all of the factors that are involved in what makes human life what it is, race is one of the least relevant to my way of thinking.
Yeah, I've said this, and I've gotten heat for this, but I truly mean this. I guess I'm white. I couldn't even tell you. I think I'm part Irish, part Italian. My grandma insists that I'm part Native American. I just don't care. I care about who my grandparents were. Like, I do care about that, but the race part of it, I don't care. But I say this all the time. If white people tomorrow would say, hey, we're done procreating. We're all going to go get our tubes tied, or we're all going to get, fixed so that we can't have kids. We're all going to get in birth control. And within 30 years, there were no longer white people procreating. I wouldn't care at all. I'm more concerned that 100 years after I'm dead, that there are people that think like me than there are people that look like me. Right? So I would like the ideas of liberty and freedom and personal responsibility and kind of Christian values and defense of free speech and, having conversations with people that disagree with you. I want that stuff to continue. If someone looks like me, I don't really care about that. I don't at all. Now, I would never advocate for intentional genocide of a population or, forced sterilization or something like that. But if people choose not to procreate, I don't care. And I think that go ahead.
Just on that, if I could just jump in the UK, they're really big on having diversity in all of their advertising campaigns. But there was this massive billboard in the UK where all of the people on it were white. And guess what the billboard was advertising? Sterilisation.
Yeah. I mean, it's unreal.
That kind of thing is blatant, in your face, anti-white. And that kind of thing I do care about.
Oh, yeah. That's absolutely...
If you're trying to beat a people down to the point where they give up and no longer even want to breed, then we have a problem.
Oh yeah. That's and I don't care about I don't care about the. By the way, you could make an argument if you're in the black community. Like, what do you think Planned Parenthood's about? Yes. Is it any coincidence that all the abortion centers are in black neighborhoods? That Margaret Sanger deeply resented black people and that wanted to start that to curb the black population? So
was she a Democrat?
Well, I wonder. Of course she was. But that's the funny thing, right? Just that issue. It's like, wait a minute. If everyone on the right's so racist and, why are they deeply, deeply upset about abortions in the black community? You think that the racist whites, even if you cared about abortion, would be like, well, stop aborting white babies. But we don't really care what happens. But instead, it's the exact opposite. They're like, this is outrageous. Like, again, it's just, it doesn't fit their narrative, though. But, like, what you're saying about this idea of, like, guilt and stuff like this, like, so I was reading this article today, and I haven't checked the data, but it did seem like this was a qualified person making this claim. And they claimed that if you go to a sexual assault trial, and you're picking a jury pool as the defendant, right? So you're the lawyer for the defendant who's been accused of sexually assaulting a woman. Do you know the gender of the people you want in the jury? It's women. And do you know why? Because women are more able to look at it neutrally. Men want to virtue signal that they care about sexual assault, so they're more likely to vote guilty. Okay. I mean, that's amazing when you think about it, right? But that's true. You can see how that would be true, because that's exactly what we're seeing. People can't jump over themselves fast enough to say, oh, I'm born terrible. I'm born a horrible person. And and it's just not true. And you think that that'll save you. Look at poor Drew Brees. He thought that coming out, I don't know if you know who Drew Brees is, quarterback for the Saints. One of the best.
Heard of, but yeah, don't.
I mean, by any accounts, definitely he'll be a Hall of Fame quarterback, definitely one of the best players in the past 20 years in the NFL. And by all accounts, a guy with a lot of fans, likable guy. He comes out and he issues a statement that's like, hey, I understand the protests, peaceful protest is good, but I really love the flag in this country. He's now apologized 4 times. 4. His wife wrote an article saying, white people like us are the problem. It's not enough. They're going to keep grinding that guy to nothing. Don't bend your knee. Don't apologize. You know what's in your heart, right? Yep. That's what matters. Look, I'm telling you right now.
And if he hadn't have apologized, it would have just gone away. Because what do they do after that?
Right.
Where do they go? Like, if you just say, well, look, I'm not sorry. I love my country. I love all people. I love black people. I love white people. I'm not... Cause I think he was saying that he supported people protesting over the death of George, as do I. I don't support looting and rioting and the killing of people like David Dorn and the other black policeman that was shot and killed. I don't support that, but I do support people's right to get out and protest against police violence.
Right.
So so if he just makes that stand, what do? They've got nowhere to go.
Well, and that's just it. I learned this from when I debated. So I saw that I started debate in 2003, and I had 4.5 years of debate, and then I was a judge and a coach for another 3 years after that. And debate is, there's no division. So we debated. I went to Clarendon University. I debated Harvard. It's just, it is what it is. There is the left of the left. Some of the people are brilliantly intelligent, but they are as left-wing as it occurs. I mean, just incredibly left. And so back in 2003, I got into the game. Everyone pretty much had high school experiments except me. And so I'd get in and it's like, oh, the topic's the same all year. So the topic this year will be subsidies. We should end corn subsidies. Half the time you're affirming that, half the time you're negating that. Pretty simple. So you do all this research. You're like, okay, corn subsidies, blah, 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 blah. And you walk into your first round and you stand up for your first speech and you're like, corn subsidies, we should get rid of them because X, Y, and Z. And your opponent says, you're white, you should lose. And you're just like, what? You're white, you're evil, you should lose. Why haven't you acknowledged your white privilege? Or you're a man, you should lose. Why haven't you acknowledged your male privilege? So when I was first into debate and you heard this, you would become indignant. You'd be like, how dare you? What are you talking about? But you can't win that way. In fact, you'll straight up be drummed out of the community. So instead you have to say, well, no, I'm not white because whiteness is a choice. That's how you have to argue against it. I'm not a man because being a man's a choice. You can't defend being white. You can't defend being a man. You have to say, and I can tell you a funny story about this. I had this, I debated with this kid Martell one time. So by my third year, I was one of the better people in our team, and I was at the highest division, varsity. But we had this kid Martell who was a good debater, but he was a novice. I shouldn't have said his name. That's okay. But anyways, he happened to be a black guy, and he was kind of, I don't say this to begrudge him. I think he would acknowledge this as well. He was better than his partner, so he was a jerk to his partner. Because you get in the heat of arguing and you're like, shut up, let me talk, And that's not good. You're only as good as the weakest link on your team, so you have to have a good relationship. So I was instructed, Rob, partner with this guy at this tournament, and he's going to go at the highest level with you. And make him feel like an idiot the entire tournament. Then he could realize, boy, it sucks when your partner is talking down to you the whole time. So that's what happened, and he's actually doing pretty good, but I'm still like, what are you doing, you moron? Stuff like that. Anyways, we get into the final round, and we're 2-3. If we win this round, we'll make it to the the elimination round the next day. Anyways, here's why I bring it up. Martell happens to be black. Yeah, I said his name again. We're debating Kansas State, who's a radical feminist team. If you hand your plan to the other team before the round so they know what you're going to talk about, I tell Martell, I was like, if you say the phrase, you guys, to this team, we lose. You cannot say the phrase, you guys. Do you understand that? He says, yes. So right before, 10 seconds before the round begins, he says, hey, you guys need your plan back? And that was it. They start screaming, you guys, how dare you? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just sitting there like, oh my God. Because it's the worst debate. So for the next 2 hours, I have to sit here and grovel and apologize. So here was my strategy. I had 2 strategies. One, I stood up and said, no, sexism is not the problem. It's racism. And you're talking about my partner like that because he's black. Because that's the only thing I can say. And then the other thing I said was, you said you guys to us, but I'm a woman. And they're like, what? I was like, I identify as a woman. And by the end of the round, everyone except me and my partner was crying. The judge offered to give me a hug. And I was like, yeah, I made it all up. Now, they still voted against me, but they were deeply sorry that they misgendered me. I mean, that's how stupid and ridiculous. That's the highest level of debate in this country. That's how stupid it was. And that stuff was occurring in 2006, 2007. And I'm telling everyone, I was like, debate's just 10 years ahead of the curve. The stuff we're seeing in this community now is going to be... Guess what? These people are going to go off to be congressmen. They're going to go off to be lobbyists. They're going to go off to be CEOs of companies. I mean, these are people with full rides at Harvard, at Yale, at Cornell, like, right? Prestigious universities. Supposedly, I mean, I can't tell you how many people I debated with perfect SAT scores. I mean, these are geniuses. And I'm watching them like, they're so smart, they're dumb. I'm like, what are you talking about? And their ideology was completely repugnant. I mean, it was nothing to be told we need to kill all white people. And I didn't care about that, by the way, because that's the hype. I would rather you say that than you're evil for being white. Because theoretically in debate, I could walk in and say, hey, nuke China. I don't really mean nuke China, but it's a game. And so you're like, well, here's the reasons that would be bad, you know? So if you say kill all white people, fair enough. But when you start saying, oh, and you're white and you deserve to die, that's when I would take offense, because I'd be like, don't make this personal. You know, but anyways, the reason I bring that up is in context of this, like you saying, if you refuse to apologize, they have nothing. And when I would debate these teams, oftentimes what I would do, you have to go through this whole thing. You have to make them define terms. Like we said about fascism, how they've redefined that term. So, for example, when they would say there's a problem with the patriarchy or there's a problem with whiteness, I would say define whiteness. And most of the time they couldn't, just like they can't define systemic racism, just like they can't define what defund the police means. It means whatever they want it to in that moment to win the argument. So define whiteness. Well, you know, blah, 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 blah. Well, you know, what does that mean? Is Colin Powell white or black? Because they couldn't say you were born evil. Even they knew they couldn't quite. Now they can, but back then they couldn't. So you had to choose whiteness. So is Colin Powell white or black? Is Eminem white or black? Did Eminem choose blackness? Or is he still white? What's the difference, you know? And basically it came down to money and power. And so then I would be like, okay, I work at Burger King 40 hours a week to pay my way through the cheapest school possible in Pennsylvania. I have a sister that's 20 years younger than me. My parents' furnace went out, so I couldn't pay my rent for the past 3 months because I sent money to help pay the furnace. I got my car for $80 at the junkyard. If it rains, it just stalls out randomly and I have to push it over the road. I don't have electricity in my house right now. How about you? Oh, you go to the University of Louisville? You drive a Jaguar? You got a full scholarship? You're right, though. I'm white and you're black. You know, and the other thing I would say to them is I would just say, I would stop the debate. I would just be like, I'm not going to let you call me a racist. If you call me a racist, I'm leaving. If you want to have a serious discussion about race, we can. But I'm not a racist, and I'm not going to let you call me one. And when you do that, they have no power over you, right? They just, their power is you, right? You consent to give them power by caring about their insults. And if you refuse to make that concession and you say, I'm not a racist, I don't care what you say, you could yell and scream and shout, and I'm still not a racist. Now, if you want to have a civil conversation, we will, but I'm not going to listen to you call me a racist. And it really takes the vigor and the sting out of, you know, how they argue.
Yeah, when I was at uni, it's similar kind of a thing, but different. When I was at uni, there was a large group of, I guess you'd call them hardcore militant feminists. They just dislike guys intensely, and so I would just mock them. Right. And the funny thing was that they all gravitated to me and thought that I was the best thing since sliced bread. And like I remember one time that we were going to be having a debate, and there was like, you know, 3 or 4 guys in the room. It was just coincidentally, there was about 3 or 4 guys in the room, and there was like about 50 women that were there because the guys just had, for some reason, a lot of the guys hadn't turned up. And so, you know, I'm just sitting there and I'm going like this, you know, they're seeing my head moving, and because we're going to be having a debate about gender. And they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, I'm just counting how many people are here to, you know, to see what the odds are of the guys winning. And it was like, you know, there's 3 guys and 50 girls. So, yeah, I reckon that it's about a 50-50 chance. And they were all kind of, oh, but they were giggling and thinking that it was really funny. And then another guy walked in and I'm like, yes, the victory is assured for them. It's 4 under 50 now. The victory is assured. And they thought it was great.
Well, look, here's the thing, right? And this is kind of a little off subject, but this is totally true. When you laugh and joke and you could make fun of yourself, and you could do that with people that are different than you, that's what brings us together as cultures more than anything, right? Like the ability to have humility, to make fun of yourself. There's this postmodernist philosopher that I kind of like, even though I disagree with him because he's communist. His name's Slavoj Zizek, but he's an interesting guy. I actually just watched a video of his yesterday that's talking exactly about what we're talking about white liberal guilt and how you should be wary of it. Now, he believes in systemic racism and things like that, so I disagree with that part of it. But when he's saying you should be very suspicious of the white liberal claiming oppression, because what that person's really doing is they're achieving their elite status and they're achieving victimhood status. So it's just a mechanism for them to achieve more power. But Zizek tells this story, and I forget where he's from, maybe Serbia. And I'm going to botch the ethnicities here, but he has to have this working relationship with this professor for the next month. They're working on something, and so they get a cab, and he goes to the professor's house, and they meet, and they become decent friends, and they're very cordial relationship. And he said after about 2 weeks, oh, and by the way, their ethnicities were in this part of the world where they hated each other, right? That, like, it's like the Kurds and the Serbs or something like that. And so he says after about 2 weeks, they get in the car together, and the guy just looks at him. And let's just say Zizek's a Serbian. I don't know, though, but just for the sake of this argument. He says, without saying a word, the man just looks at him and goes, how does a Serb masturbate? And Zizek's like, what? And he's like, he digs a hole in the ground, puts his wiener in it, and waits for the world to turn. And it was a joke of the laziness of Serbs. And they just started laughing and telling these jokes about each other the whole way. And he's like, what that was symbolic. That was symbolic that we have raised our friendship. We've gone to a point where now we understand that we respect each other enough that we could make fun of each other. And that's an important thing. The opposite of that is what we see in culture today, where you have to walk on eggshells. Where, for example, because of the cultural domination of the establishment left and movements like Black Lives Matter, not only can you not joke, you can't even cite statistics. Like, if you were to make this claim publicly, you would be drummed out of a public arena if you said the following. If you said, maybe the reason that there's more violence between police and the black community is the black community commits 50% of violent crimes in this country. Yep. Data is not racist. If I use that data to say, therefore I hate black people, I don't want them in the country, I'm being a racist. If I use that data to say, this is a huge problem, how do we solve it? That's not being racist. But you can't, not only can you not joke, you can't even mention this data. Look at Tucker Carlson last night. He gave a monologue on just the censorious nature of Black Lives Matter and the groups that are, we were talking before we came on, he was Serbian, the soccer player, or I guess to you, football player.
No, soccer. No, we call them soccer.
Oh, okay. You have Australian football.
We have the only real football is Aussie rules football.
I don't know what's going on.
Football and everything else is something else.
Yeah, Aussie rules football, I don't know what's going on, but I know I'd never play it after watching it. It's brutal. It's like watching a UFC match and the ball just happens to be there. Like, that's Australian football. So, but yeah, like, so the soccer player, what happened was his wife tweeted that she didn't like the rioters. People then went to the LA Galaxy Stadium, where he's a soccer player for. They demanded his release. He was forced to give an apology, not for what he said, but for what his wife said. Then he was forced to endorse Black Lives Matter, and then he was fired. Yeah. That's the power of this movement. And so when you set that up, all you're doing is causing division, right? And that's not fair to the black community as well either, right? Like, Gavin McInnes, who I know I'll get in trouble for mentioning because he's a Proud Boy. I don't care. I thought Gavin was funny, and I haven't seen everything he said. What I seen, I never saw him be too terrible. Anyways, he used to talk about this where he works in ad executive agencies, and he was like, a black woman would walk in, everyone's joking around at the lunchroom, and then a black woman walks in, and you could just hear a pin drop. Everyone just gets quiet. And he's like, it's not fair to the black woman. She might be the coolest person in the world. Like, heck yeah, I'll sit here and joke around. But our society has set it up so much that it's like, oh, well, you can't, you gotta be silent. You can't say. And it's tragic for all people involved, because the reality is when you could laugh with each other, that's a big step. That doesn't solve everything, but it's a big step in understanding that, we're not as divided as we think. And we've just taken all humor out of our society when it comes to things like that.
Yeah, and humor is a huge thing for building relationships and friendships and stuff. So if you take that out, that is a major plank in your capacity to sort of build a friendship with people, build a relationship with people that's gone. you kind of wonder whether it's calculated in a way or whether it's just the way that it worked. But like, I mean, especially here in Australia, like one of the things that we do, we just hang shit on each other all the time.
Right.
Mocking your mates is what you do. And it is a bit of a blokey thing as well, I guess, more generally. And so when you remove that ability to have a bit of a laugh and a joke, you're removing a major plank of a relationship. So it's a compounding issue, on top of everything else.
Well, and I do think, I'm glad that this came up. We weren't really going to focus on it, but I do think that it's important, and I think it's intentional. I think that, again, the people in charge, they want to take entertainment. Like, there's this idea of bread in circuses, right? Where in Rome, where you treat your people like crap, but as long as you throw them some bread and have a circus, then everything's all right. And so the idea is, like, you hear people say this all the time. Well, if people would stop watching the NFL, or if people would stop, watching movies and they would go out and do X, the world would be a better place. And there's truth to that sometimes, but there's also truth the other way, which is you'll drive people crazy if you lock them down, tell them they can't have fun, and tell them their entire country's evil. What do you expect to happen? Right? And like, there needs to be an outlet where you could joke, where you could have fun. And that's one of the things, like, this might blow people's mind because I'm on here talking a lot. See you, 223. Thanks for coming, man. I'm on here talking about politics a lot, but basically when I'm not on here, I'm not talking about politics. This is kind of my cathartic release where I'm talking about it. My wife loves it because before I had a YouTube channel, then I was just talking to her about politics, and she's like, shut up. I don't care. So, but one of the things that I find frustrating, we have a lockdown. My favorite sports team is the Pittsburgh Pirates, which are basically the schlubs of the professional sports world. They had a 20-year losing streak, which is almost unprecedented because most cities would have the dignity to give up on their team by then, but not the Pittsburgh Pirates. They kept chugging along, So every year it's like where I live, it gets snowy and it's dismal in the winter, and then right around the time that April's coming around, it's all of a sudden the grass is green, it's sunny out, and baseball's starting, and I'm like, I know they suck, but I'm just excited that baseball's back on. So that's kind of, to me, in that sense, that entertainment's important. Well, the other day, all of this stuff, I'm doing these debates, I'm researching all this stuff, I'm debating people, I'm up until 4 a.m. doing videos, then I'm going to work all day. So I'm at work, and I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm just going to turn on the radio to sports talk radio. Because I know they're talking about maybe baseball starting up. And I was like, all right, let's see. So I turn it on to my local Pittsburgh channel, and I don't know how radio works in Australia, but there's national affiliates. So we have a local CBS Pittsburgh station, but when they run the national ads on that station, it'll be the national. So it was a former football player was the CBS Sports Minute. And they just play this music, and someone comes on and they give a little take from the national level. And it was Tiki Barber. And Tiki was there to tell me that Black Lives Matter and how racist the NFL was for Colin Kaepernick not being on. And so I get through that, and then the next guy that comes on, he's talking about, will baseball's players agree with the owners to have a new contract, to have a season? Okay, kind of dumb, but interesting, I'm listening. And they had to make sure to include for 3 minutes there, Black Lives Matter, and this country's horribly racist. And I just had to shut it off. I'm like, I can't take it anymore. Like, I just wanted to forget about this stuff for 5 minutes in my life, and I can't. And so what do? You turn on, late night comedy. My parents' generation, or at least my grandparents, used to turn on Johnny Carson. I challenge you to go through 20 years of him and find anything political. It was just fun. He'd bring someone on from the left, from the right. They had fun. That's what it was. Now, you can't find something that's not dominated by this establishment left-wing narrative. Or you go watch an Avengers movie. Yep, there it is, thrown right in your face. And it gets to the point where it's like, you're intentionally messing with people's psyche, I believe. That's not to say that I think we should, as a government, go in and say, hey, Avengers, you have to do X, Y, Z with your movie. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying this cultural dominance and the fact that we can no longer just be entertained. Everything has to be... By the way, I don't care if you want to make a movie with a cool female superhero, more power to you. If I don't like it, I won't watch it. But the idea that it used to be this stuff was about entertainment, but now it's about spreading some sort of political message, I think that has a deep effect on the psyche of a country, because it's like you can't get it out of your head. There's no release for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Aussie rules footy. I used to play back in the day, and I didn't really enjoy playing so much, but I was good at it, so I played. But the watching it and the complexities of the game are things that I really enjoy. Like quite often I'd find myself watching the TV with friends, watching the football when it's on, and and I would say something about a trend that I saw happening in the game, and then 30 or 40 seconds later, that one of the commentators would say it. And I kind of got known for that,
Right.
because I really get into it and I really enjoy it. And a lot of people kind of look at me and go, look, but I'm so into politics, and I really look into politics and history, and I'm into all of this stuff. How do I find things like football enjoyable? And that's my downtime. Like I have a brain that doesn't sort of shut up sometimes, and football is really good because I'll just sort of focus on the footy, and it gives me something to think about. It's something I can joke about with my mates. We have a beer and we hang shit on each other's footy teams or whatever. That's and it's good. You can't be a political beast 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you're going to burn out and you're going to end up going completely insane. You just sit rocking backwards and forwards in the corner. You have to have your release. And for me, I play a bit of guitar. As you know, I do the parody songs. I love music and I love my sport. And they are necessary. And to me, they're essential things. Like I could live without them, but you know what I mean. Like they're important. You have to have those things. You've got to have your release. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to coming back. Our footy starts up on Thursday. Woo-hoo.
Oh yeah,
you go, man.
They lifted your lockdown,
and the footy's back.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's but yeah. So yeah, I guess I figure we'll go till 12:30 if you're cool with that. I guess one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is how is the culture in the United States and this sort of what we're talking about here with these protests and the idea of systemic racism and things like that. It seems that spreads worldwide to some degree. So what is the scene like in Australia right now? Is there awareness of what's going on? I know you said there's been some sort of limited protesting and things like that. What does that look like on the ground there?
Well, for probably the first 3 or 4 days after George Floyd died, our media our news was almost wall-to-wall coverage of that and the racism happening in the US. Like we are one of those things, like a butterfly flaps its wings in the US and we suffer from a hurricane here. That's just the way things go, and our media really do try to whip up the race baiting frenzy here. And we do, we have people in our media. There's a show in particular here which is just terrible. It should be removed from our TV. That the guy who runs it is a Muslim guy. And well, enough said. He shouldn't be on TV. He's just terrible human being in my eyes. He is all about destroying our country, and he's quite happy to do it. But again, and we did have the protests here. We've now got our politicians coming out and saying, "Oh, if it hadn't been for those protests, we would have been able to free up the country a lot more. But now we have to wait another couple of weeks, because we're all racist. You have to be punished. It's not the fault of the people who weren't protested. But the reality is." Again, it's the same thing as the US. We have good and bad in our police force here. I grew up in the country. We had some absolutely terrible cops there. So I know that there are bad cops. And are there going to be cops that are racist? Yes, there are. But do we have this idea? Do we have this systemic racist problem in our police force and in our government? No, we don't. In fact, if anything, it's the opposite of that. We're trying to figure out how to fix the problems in our black community, and we probably hurt them by trying to help them in a lot of ways, because the way that we try to help them is wrong. But it has been a major part of our conversation. And look, I've actually heard people around me, white people, saying to me, "You can't be racist against white people." That's where we're at here now, and I'm like, yeah, it's funny, because that's what they said about Jews in Germany in the 1930s. Right, yeah. Didn't work out so well for them. Yeah. So we do have it here, but we don't have the numbers. We don't, because we're just lethargic people, and we've got 25 million people spread over a fairly massive area. So we have two big cities. Melbourne's got about 3.5 million, and Sydney's got 4.5 million. So there's 7 million of our people in two cities, and the rest are thinly spread out. So you need to have a large group of people to get the momentum for things like rioting and stuff. So we did have protests. We probably had I don't know, maybe 10,000 people or something in Melbourne. At a protest for something that happened in America, which is why I do say that Antifa here, they're desperately wanting to be part of America so they can hate America and not look like retards.
Right.
Because at the moment they just do. That they absolutely hate America, and they focus on America, and they hate. And I used to be on the left, so I kind of understand it, but it's just really sad and pathetic,
Yeah.
So we do have it here. but nowhere near to the extent of the US.
Well, the argument that you're saying that people say you can't be racist against whites, this is something that I debated quite often. And the argument behind that was that you can't be racist if you don't have institutional power. That was the argument they made. And so, which is clearly garbage. That's clearly a garbage argument. For example, I don't need the power of the state to act out of racial bigotry to negatively affect your life. For example, let's just take white and black out of it. I could be an Asian person who hates Hispanics. As an Asian person, I don't really have institutional power, but I decide to murder a Hispanic woman. I'm a racist, right? That's still racism. Like the idea, you don't have any real power behind your racism that's absurd. But here's let's
stream on. Is this stream on YouTube?
Yes.
Are you streaming on? You are streaming. Oh, okay. I won't say what I was going to say then. It's not for YouTube's ears.
Yeah, isn't that unfortunate? We have to self-censor.
But I mean, again, you go back to what happened in the UK, right? That particular group of people over there, that peaceful organisation there, they targeted people of particular racial backgrounds because they were of that racial background. Well, in the case
and said their religion justified it. That's what they told those girls.
Yeah. They picked Sikh girls as well.
Right.
But as far as I'm concerned, if you see a young girl like 11 or 12 or 13 years old and you nail her tongue to a table and then you do to her what was done to that girl, no, I don't care what the relative colours are. You're just evil. You're an asshole and you're racist. And you need to be put away, and you need to never get let out of prison. I don't care what your race is. Anybody can be racist against anybody. If you have the power to harm somebody, and you harm them because you don't like that race, I don't care. Like a 12-year-old girl has got no institutional power when she's, like a homeless girl, or she's a ward of the state, but she just happens to be a white girl, and 50 people of an organisation that won't be named that are from a peaceful religion decide that they're going to rape her in the night.
Right.
I'm sorry, but she is not the victim of happiness there. She's a victim of racism, and it is brutal. And she is not like her suffering is no less bad because she happens to have white skin. It means nothing to her. She's just a child.
Right. And not to get too in the weeds here, but even if you were a Muslim that disagreed with that, the argument that you're being treated as if you can't be racist is actually still detrimental to you. Or if you're black and you're told you, because you're being treated like a child, and it doesn't allow real reforms to occur in your community. So, but as always, when you hear these absurd, hypocritical statements from people, let's see how that applies in the real world. So let's say for a moment I concede and say, you're right. You can't be racist unless you have institutional power. So let's take white supremacists in the United States. What institutional power do they have? If you come out and you say, hey, I'm a member of the KKK, can you think of one person from one corporation, one media, one university, one Silicon Valley group, or one politician that'll be like, hey, cool, you're in the KKK. Yeah, let's listen to what this guy has to say. Of course not.
CNN.
Well, yeah, well, they'll bring Richard Spencer on, yeah.
They need them.
They
need those guys. That's why they pump up David Duke, because no one cares about that clown. And didn't he first run as a Democrat anyway?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that when I looked at the profile of that guy, he initially tried to run for Parliament as a Democrat, right?
By the way, you know who he likes? Like Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. They both agree with the same thing. We can't live in the country together. We hate the Jews. So it's like they're partners, like, and yet somehow Farrakhan's taking pictures with Obama, and they're running security at George Floyd's memorial today. So if that's the case, we literally have our institutions are so dominated by this sort of Black Lives Matter narrative that if your wife makes a tweet that they don't like, you have to apologize for her and lose your job. There was a professor.
Your own wife.
Insane.
It's Orwellian, isn't it?
Oh man, I'll assure you this: unless my wife does something incredibly heinous, I would rather live in poverty with no money on the street before I'll kneel to a mob and denounce my wife in front of her. Outrageous, absolutely outrageous. And shame on that guy for doing it. But I understand he thought that he was just doing it to keep his job. Well, you see what happens. It's never good enough. You take the knee, then they'll demand you lay on the ground. You make the apology, then they demand that you resign from your job. It's never going to be enough. But that's where we're at.
So once you've laid on the ground, they'll demand that you dig a hole.
That's right.
And you get in the hole.
And so if that's where we're at, if you could only be racist if you have institutional power, Well, where's the institutional power lie now? You know? So then, now all of a sudden that changes, though. And again, when I bring this up, like I did to a gentleman last night, it was actually, I will say this, it is worth saying, most of the people I've debated here in the past week, it would be hard to ever find common ground. But some of them there were. And this gentleman I talked to last night, I actually think he's a black gentleman. He thinks that there's systemic racism and stuff. But I think the more we talk to each other, I didn't agree with him, but I could at least understand where he was coming from. And I think he would say the same about me. And we both acknowledge that there are problems that we would like to see be addressed. We're just coming at it from a different angle. But anyways, when I brought this up to him, and I'm like, you keep saying institutional racism, but your side controls all the institutions. And then his answer was, well, but they're only pretending. So it's not, but if that's the case, it's like, then what's the solution? Like, then why are you endorsing them instead of the groups that they're going after? For example, you'll let them pretend that, here's how I look at it. This is hard to explain. I would rather have a group, like a political group, or even a person that just says, hey, Rob, I hate you. I'm against you. I'm going to do everything I can to be against you. Then a group that's like, Rob, I'm right with you. Everything you say, I agree. And then behind my back, they're like, how can we sabotage Rob? So if that's the case and you're in the black community and you're like, I don't like the Republicans or Democrats, but the Democrats pretend they control all the institutions and they're intentionally sabotaging us and pretending to be on our side, why in God's name would you keep supporting them?
Yeah, well, I actually do agree with him in that sense. I do think that that's exactly what the Democrats do. They pretend to be on the side of the black community while they actually ensure that the policies that they set up keep them in oppression. You know, that does seem to me to be quite legitimate. But yeah, you're exactly right. So wouldn't the logical conclusion then be, okay, these guys are a cancerous plague, maybe we should look elsewhere? You know, the Democrats, they you know, Malcolm X, he said, you know, that the most dangerous person to the black man is the liberal, the white liberal. And I think he was right in that. You know, history seems to be bearing out the truth of that comment. And so if you're a black person or you're any person and you realize that there are people that are undermining you, why the hell would you keep supporting them? Well, it makes no sense to me.
Right.
I'd be running to get away from them.
I totally agree. And here's the thing, right? The irony is, though, that these groups, the institutions, are benefiting black people, but not all of them, right? And there we get back to the crux of the issue again. The elites, the people with power, they don't care about you if you don't have power. And guess what? Skin color is basically irrelevant to them. And so the Al Sharptons of the world and, you know, these black leaders that have gotten incredibly wealthy over financing racial division their entire lives, yes, the system benefits them. The black academics, the black politicians, of course the system benefits them. Why? Because you can't criticize. Like, why are we talking about, you know, let's just say, I know this isn't reality, but we got two parties in the U.S., Republican, Democrat, 50-50 shot either of them win, right? One of those parties, the Democrat Party, we're saying that the vice president has to be black. Has to be black. Well, why are we saying that? Because clearly it's advantageous. Clearly being black in that sense is advantageous. Clearly you have this shield. You know, Scott Adams, who does the Dilbert cartoons, I really recommend people check him out. He does a YouTube show every day and a Periscope show. I don't agree with everything he says, but he thinks about things in a different way. He starts every one of his shows out saying, I wish I had free speech like a black person. I wish that I was able to do it. Someday I'll be able to have free speech like a black person, and won't that be amazing? And so he'll say, I can't say this, but I'm retweeting a black gentleman that says X. That's interesting, because he can't say it. He'll be drummed out of polite society if he says it, and we know that's the case. But that person that I'm talking to, he's right, that when it comes to the inner city, having that power for elite people that are either liberal or black, to have that power to say, everyone who disagrees with me is racist, you can't disagree with me about anything, you have to bow your knee to me, you have to wash my feet. That is incredible power, but it doesn't do anything for the poor people, and therein lies the rub. If the people in this country and around the world would realize that our elected leaders intentionally cause division amongst us so that they could screw us over year after year after year, maybe then we could come together and get these bums out of office. But as long as we're busy saying white people were born with original sin, or all black people are violent criminals, or whatever extremists on either end of the spectrum want to say, then we never realize, hey, we have more in common than we have different. We're both being screwed over by the people that claimed. Because guess what? I could say the same thing about the Republican Party, right? Yeah, I have an institution, the Republican Party, that supposedly is looking out for my interests. They're not. They're not at all. I'm sure, I don't know what the parties call themselves in Australia, but I'm sure whatever the Conservatives are over there, they ain't looking out for your interest. They pretend to. They say they do.
Oh, no.
You know?
No, that they stopped looking. Yeah, they stopped looking out for the Australian people a long time ago. It happened around the same time, around that sort of Maggie Thatcher, Ronald Reagan era, where we started getting into that political pragmatism, where you started looking to sort of globalise economies and all of that kind of stuff. And there might have been something in that initially that was valid. I didn't like it right from the start. I'm like, I feel a little bit uncomfortable at this, and especially with the fact that you had, at that time, we had Bob Hawke was our political leader here, and he was on the left, and you had Thatcher, Reagan, and Hawke. Two people that are supposedly on the hard right, not that they were, but who were positioned that way by the media, and a political party that were on the left, all engaging in the exact same economic model that appeared to be basically working at sending our jobs overseas. And I'm like, I'm not sure that I like what's going on here. That was where my politics actually sort of changed. I had been on the left, and that was something that made me sort of go, oh, hang on a minute. I'm not sure that I like what's going on here. And from that point on, we've just seen a situation develop where both of our parties, the one of them which appears to be more on the left and appears to be more in favour of Australians, is the one who's not in power. Whereas the one who was in power just keeps on going on with the same bullshit policies that have sent all of our jobs, all of our manufacturing overseas, that has let China buy up our farmland, that has allowed the Chinese to buy our raw minerals for half a cent a tonne and then sell it back to us as a value-added good for a huge amount of money for them, and just a massive detriment to us. And so, there is no political party that works on behalf of the Australian people anymore, and there hasn't been for quite a while. And that's been a Western phenomenon. That and I saw something just popped up on my YouTube recommended list a while ago that showed Donald Trump from, I think it was in the 90s, early 90s, talking with, might have been Oprah Winfrey even, where he was saying that there's something going on in our politics because all of our, we are funding, we're giving a lot of money to China, but we're also giving them our jobs, and we're giving them all of this stuff. And he was right then, and he is much more right now. And now I think we're starting to kind of reap a little bit of the benefit of, in inverted commas, the benefit of what's been done to us.
Right. I totally agree. And the irony is, it's like we look at things so superficially that people in politics on both sides. Now, I think we both agree that it's way more common and powerful on the left, but still, they're the people that want to play identity politics. And that's the irony, like we were saying before. Who's the best friend of the KKK? The Black Panthers, and vice versa. Extremists on one side fuel the extremist on the other. So when we focus on racial division, the only groups you help are the establishment and the extremist. The average people that just want to go about their life, and they might have slight political differences, they lose every time that we start to focus on race. Every time, no matter what their race is. And so the irony is, when you want to simplify it and look at it just in these ways, well, the institutions right now are benefiting white people, or right now they're benefiting black people. It's all so grossly oversimplified and inaccurate. For example, the easiest example is to take the patriarchy, feminism, right? Men versus women, dividing us based on that. And women will want to say, like, well, look at the top. This is how we know that women are kind of being disenfranchised in the West, because you look at the top Fortune 500 companies, how many of the women are CEOs? And you're like, okay, you're right, but that doesn't prove sexism. No, it proves sexism, because there aren't many women that are CEOs of those. But you can never go the opposite way with it and go, okay, well, look at the people that live the worst. The homeless, the people that live in squalor, overwhelmingly men. So why is it that when we're looking, why don't we look at the full picture? Why don't we just look, well, we'll take this one metric, the people at the very top, and if they all look a certain way, that proves looking that way is a privilege. Well, no, it doesn't. That proves even if you prove that looking that way was a privilege for them, that doesn't mean that the average white person, or the average black person, or the average man, or the average woman could be looked at. There's more of a difference between me and the Fortune 500 person than there is between me and anyone of any different ethnicity or religion, right? And that's one of the things I see, that it's borderline intentional ignorance. I think certainly it's intentional from the people in charge. But if you're sitting there and you're thinking, like, I used to say it all the time, you'd see the odd racist that would come in when I used to bartend. oh, I don't like those black folks. All they do is sit around and drink, and they're unemployed, and they just sit at the bar all day. And I'm like, really? What's your job? Well, I got fired a couple weeks ago. Oh, and how long have you been in the bar today? Oh, like 6 hours. Interesting. The very complaint you have about people is what you yourself do. And that's kind of the truth. Like, I used to tell people...
works.
Yeah. I'd just be like, if you actually sit down and talk to people, that's exactly what the people screwing you over wouldn't want, because you'd start to realize, hey, yeah, we're kind of all facing the same problems. The reason it's so much worse, in my opinion, in the black community is, one, because the idea of victimhood that's been foisted on them that makes that situation worse. And second, just a matter of geographics, that being poor where I live in rural America, where a lot of white poor people live, because you're not stacked on top of each other, there's less likely to be violent crime. If you have a lot of people that are poor and hungry and they're living right on top of each other, there's more likely to be a violent interaction. Whereas if you're poor and you live in the middle of nowhere, like, there's not really many people to commit crime against. So it happens, like, don't get me wrong, but I know, I'm sorry about the visual, guys. That's to me the big mistake, that they want to focus on. Right. Oh, look, like if you're saying, oh, white people, positions of power, look at presidents, you do know that 99.99999% of white people don't get to become president. You're aware of that, right? Like, just because the president happens to be a white guy doesn't mean it's a great time to be a white guy. Like, it's so oversimplified and nonsensical.
I think another thing that harms the black community, in the US, is the fact that there was a concerted effort to get men out of the home.
Oh yeah.
And then the glorification of a particular version of manhood, which sort of comes back to that thing I was saying before about George Floyd being held up as a model when he's a guy who held a gun to the stomach of a pregnant black woman. The whole, the rap culture and that kind of thing. There's that, glorifying of gang violence and guns and drugs and that kind of thing. So it's a double whammy thing. It's not just the fact that they're all piled in on top of each other. It's the fact that they don't have any male role models there's very few of them, male role models in the home, that the kind of a role model of masculinity that they're given is awful. Rappers who are just treating women like hoes, taking drugs, guns, gangs, that kind of thing. So it's a double whammy thing in that sense, in terms of the violence in the black community.
Yeah, and it's ironic.
From what I see, anyway.
So one of the longest running television shows in the United States was just a show called Cops. It was just tons of funny stand-up jokes about.
I saw that's just been banned.
yeah, they banned Cops, but it was a show that the most amazing thing about the show Cops was, I don't know where they find these camera people that could lug around 50 pounds of camera equipment and still keep up with these perpetrators. The cops are all winded and the cameraman's just like somehow it's very amazing. It was a great show. But yeah, they canceled it. And the reason was, what could glorify bad behavior from police? Says Ice Cube, a man who wrote a song called Cop Kill. I'm sorry, that was Ice-T. Yeah. So I got to listen to Ice-T lecture me that cultural television and entertainment shows could negatively influence cops. Well, he literally made all of his wealth singing about shooting the police. Now, I don't care that Ice-T... Look, if you do whatever art or entertainment you want, I don't care. But if people choose to glorify the wrong things, you don't then get to look at stuff on the other end of the spectrum and say, well, I have a problem with that. And it's the insanity that we see of just how powerful these cultural establishment left is. You know that if you in Christmas, every year around Christmas, they come after this song, Baby It's Cold Outside. Do you know the song I'm talking about? And it's
I have heard of that.
It's just a song where it's a man and woman singing back and forth. And it's just them flirting. And the guy's like, I'm not going to sing the song, but the basic gist of it's the guy's like, hey, you should stay over here tonight. And she's like, well, I really got to be getting out. And he's like, but it's so cold out there. Don't leave. He's not saying like, oh, yeah, we're going to have gratuitous sex. Like, it's not that. It's just like a flirty song, you know? That's considered, we are told that that's beyond the pale. That's rape culture. Meanwhile, Jay-Z's at the White House singing Big Pimpin'. I don't know if you've looked up the lyrics to that. Not exactly the most respectful to women, you know, talking about just banging hoes as much as he can and kicking them to the curb. Now, I don't care that Jay-Z sang that song, but don't piss on my leg and tell me that some song from the 50s about harmful or harmless flirtation is ruining our society, but the guy singing Cop Killer isn't. And the irony is, when you see this stuff, it's like, well, Ice-T then went on to play a police officer in Law and Order for like 13 years. And Ice Cube He did these movies called like Are We There Yet? I think that was the name of them. Like Ice Cube, who's in the group NWA. Imagine what N means in that. I think you probably know what it is.
With attitude.
With attitude, yeah, right. He goes on to be on these, like, he made a career as the family-friendly family comedy guy, right? That's why Ice Cube, the guy that was in NWA, went on to move on. And we don't look at these obvious, like, discrepancies. They're playing the tough guy telling the inner city community when it benefits them, shoot the cops, snitches get stitches, drug culture, just bang hoes, blah, blah, blah. And then they ain't living like that. Like, they're off making millions working.
Ice-T never did. He's
right.
Ice-T was a private school boy, wasn't he?
Yes. So was I think Ice Cube went to the University of Leo. Now, in NWA, Eazy-E was actually the gangster that he was portraying, but he died of AIDS very young because he was a crazy gangster, you know. And so, but the only reason I bring it up is it's like they want to blame culture. They say all of these institutions. Oh well, you know, like. Going back, the first time I could remember hearing this was the idea of the old Cowboys versus Indian movies. Well, that set up, you know, that the Indians were bad and the Cowboys were good, and so we need to reverse that trend and blah, blah, blah. Okay, you could make that argument, but how can you ignore the most extraneous examples of that? Like, you know, entertainment that's literally encouraging a culture, and it has an effect. So, for example, you could talk to people that have came out of these inner city black schools. They're war zones. And not only that, it is culturally unacceptable in there to actually want to get an education. You're mocked. If you're a black student in these inner city schools, your friends will mock you. What are you doing? Trying to be white? I remember when Donovan McNabb, who was a black quarterback, he used to play for the Philadelphia Eagles, he was called too white. He wasn't black enough because he spoke in a way that didn't sound like someone that came from the streets. And so, and it, like this idea. So there are cultural problems, right? There certainly are. Like here's an idea. I know we said we'd go here, but just real quick, I'll talk to you about this. Like, this is kind of going off in the weeds a minute, but the idea is right. We know that you can't snitch. Is that a phrase you're familiar with? Like, I don't know, in Australia.
Yes, it's an American phrase. Yes, but I know it's used in the black community. If black person shoots and kills another black person, because if you do,
you'll get hurt.
You know,
right?
The community's going to come after you.
Don't be a rat, right? Like goes even outside the black culture. Like, this is something culturally that it's like, don't be a tattletale, don't be a rat, right? And I can agree with that largely. But when you're talking about things like homicides, that's a little different. Anyways. Why is it that we then, when we look at the police, we can't understand the phenomenon of, well, if there's a bad cop, why don't the other cops rat them out? Now, I'm not saying it's right, but it's just human nature. If you're close to someone, you're a coworker, your family, your friend, you're probably less likely to want to get them in trouble. And if we can see that that's clearly the case when it comes to humans outside of the police, why is it so hard to then look and say, well, wait a minute, because we've set that up culturally for everyone, clearly then, whether it be you're a police officer or maybe you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, like whatever, all of these positions, if the regular person's unlikely to rat out their friend, why do you expect it would be any different in these institutions? Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a big problem and we shouldn't try to address it, but it's just those type of things where it's like, you know, don't complain about me.
You want a balance, don't you?
Yes.
So you want a bit of a balance. Like, you don't want the Orwellian world where everybody's looking for reasons to dob everybody in that we're in now. But at the same time, you don't want people to be able to act with complete unaccountability. Like, I would like to think if one of my friends, did some heinous thing that I would not, or was repeatedly doing a heinous thing, that I'm not going to just cover it up for them. I've never been put in that situation. I'm not sure how I'd act, but I think at the very least I would confront them and say, look, you know, depending on what it was, you know, depending how serious it was, say, look, you know, you need to stop this, or, you know, you're going to have a problem with me. Don't worry about the police.
And like on that note,
I don't think that I would.
Like the irony of this is, you know, I think most people are like that. I really do. You know what people, and I know this is an overgeneralization and people could yell at me for this if they want, but in my life, you know, the people that are the least likely to do the right thing when it comes to situations like that, the ones that are shouting the loudest about how moral they are. And again, I'll go back to the debate community. Yes. I remember, this is a true story. Yeah. I remember hearing a story by a bunch of, this wasn't debaters, these were professors and coaches, you know, that were running these teams. And I remember talking to them one time, and they were talking about how the one tournament had a mixed martial arts fighter to show up and train women how to defend themselves against violence. And so which the joke I made was like, oh yeah, because the debate community, that's where you see a lot of intimidating men, like everybody's, you know what I mean? I was just making fun of like, we're all nerds, like we're a bunch of nerds. And they were like, they countered with this, oh no. Rape is very common in the debate community. I was like, what? Oh yeah, it happens all the time. In fact, and I had several people tell me this, people that I respect, all of which I believe would call themselves feminist, super left-wingy type people. Donald Trump's a Nazi type people, right? They're better than me because I voted for Trump. They're moral. They care about women. And they say none of these rapes, not only do they happen, but we could tell you several program directors that at big prestigious schools that we know have raped their students underneath them. Not just sexual assault, full-on rape. And I said, well, wait a minute. You've heard rumors, but you don't know. Oh, no. We've seen proof. We know that this has happened. And so I said, why haven't you called the police? And it was like they never even thought of it. They were like, well, you don't understand. This person's got a lot of pull in this community, and if we call the police, we might end up losing our jobs. And I was like, so your argument is you're allowing rapes to continue because you're afraid it would financially harm you to do the right thing? And they just have nothing. They're just like, now that's the same people that right now are supporting riots because there's a blue code of silence. But they know, not that they're guessing, their claim is they know that these rapes have occurred. I'll tell you this much, I don't care what job I ever have in my entire life. I don't care if I end up losing my house over this. If I know that someone's being raped, I'm speaking up about it, period. I don't care how it will affect my career. Yep. And the fact that these people want to preach to me and preen on about their moral superiority, and they're not going to talk to me anymore because, I'm a racist because I say the root of this isn't systemic racism, or I'm against the rioting. Like, I just find it always seems this way, doesn't it? The person who screams the loudest is actually doing the very thing they're accusing you of.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I suppose if you're yelling and screaming, it might sort of divert attention away from your own sins,
right?
If you're yelling and screaming at everybody else's. But yeah, so one of the things that I always say to people, if one of the people that you're hanging out with is claiming that they're better than the average person, don't trust them because they're lying,
right?
And they're not only lying to you, they're lying to themselves. It's just a simple thing, it's a bit of a cliche, but the average person always thinks they're better than the average person. And there is some kind of truth to that, but if you can't sort of recognize that, even if I'm a bit of an existentialist. I'm a Christian, but I'm also a bit of an existentialist. So, philosophically, I adhere to this idea that human beings are capable. Any human being is capable of doing what any human being has done, right? So we're all capable of engaging in the most heinous of activities, but we're also capable of doing. I'm not talking about coming up with Einstein's theory of relativity. I'm not talking about mathematically, but I'm talking about in that moral sense, right? All of those actions that people have engaged in, they're available to all of us to engage in, and we create our nature by what we do.
Well, and Jordan Peterson put this the best I've ever heard it. That he said one of the key moments in his life was as he was studying the history of Nazi Germany, when he came to the realization that he could have done what the Nazis did. And he said, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you have a look at what's going on now, because I've often sort of thought to myself, because a lot of people, again, I kind of talk about this kind of stuff being in history and politics, and you talk about the idea of how the Nazis could have done what they did. And I think you would find it's probably going to be a hell of a lot easier for that to happen than you would think. Like, even if we know that just blindly following along with what's going on is wrong, and we've seen it in the past that it does, the reality is that human beings are human beings, and there are going to be people, a lot of them, who are going to go along with what's happening. And you have a look at what's going on now, and bloody hell, the people who said, I'd never do that, these people who hate and they rail against the Nazis, my God, they're doing a most amazing impersonation of a Nazi right now.
Yeah.
Like in terms of their actions, it's like really, really, really easily, and the people who are doing it are either deceived, or I think more often are probably deceiving themselves, and there's a hell of a lot of cowardice in them want to stand up and say this is wrong.
Yeah, and Jordan,
look, a lot of the people who were Nazis weren't doing it because they wanted to; they were doing it because they feared not to.
Well, one of the
it doesn't matter what the motivation is. Go.
Yeah, one of the stories that he tells from there is there was these, I believe they were Polish police officers, and they got restationed, and they weren't Nazis really. They just went along because they kind of had to. And they got restationed, and there's this book written about it. And what ended up happening is it starts off that they were treating the Jews as humanely as possible, within the circumstance. By the end of it, they're taking Jewish women out barefoot pregnant and shooting them in a field. And when they asked these people, how could you do that? They said, because I didn't want my friend to have to do it. Right? The idea was they morally justified it by saying, this is going to be done and it needs done. So I should be the one to do it so that I don't have to put this on the psyche of someone else. And it's those type of things. We can see that happening now, where the people that are, rational people that are now calling for, otherwise rational people that are calling for riots. You're through the, I still think heinous death of one man, George Floyd. We now have riots that have killed over 20 people that have put how many hundreds of hardworking business owners out of business, maybe permanently. And for what? But it's all justified because it's hyped up in this narrative.
Yeah, and the really sad part about it is that could have been a unifying moment,
right?
If the media had decided, because look, I have not seen or heard anybody say that what was done to George Floyd was okay. Nowhere. Nobody has said that I've seen that was okay. So everybody could have united then and say, okay, there are fundamental problems here. Well, let's talk about how we address the problems. But of course, again, that was not going to work in the interest of one particular political party, was it? So
right.
It was always going to go, Candace Owens made the point when she spoke to the Congress a while ago that, in the lead up to an election, the Democrats will always look to whip up the race hate.
Yep, absolutely.
Whip up the narrative because it's the only tool that they've got in there. And it's unfortunate that that's the way it's.
Well, they need the black.
That's just the way it's panned out.
They need the black community, and they can't point to how they've helped them. So what they do is every 4 years they say, "Hey, the other side's racist," and then when you do that, you don't have to help the community. You're just constantly saying, "Well, the other side's worse, so we're not going to help you." In fact, our policies, we're just going to use you as tokens to get what we want, and then your inner cities will get worse every year. And if we do actually get to push through some of the stuff we want, it will make it even worse for you. But the other side's racist, so vote for us. So, hey, I think we'll probably wrap it up here. Look, my computer, I'm lagging a little, but I was looking for you on YouTube. Do you have a YouTube link that you could just spell out where you could tell them people where to find you or anywhere else that you'd want?
I'm only on YouTube. I could probably just grab it really quickly maybe and stick the link in.
I have you. I'm subscribed to you, I think, but there we go. I think I got you. It's lagging really bad for me. Again, if you're listening, consider donating to me so I could get some equipment that's not from the 1930s and hopefully be able to do live streams like this better. But no, I think it went well. I think at least our audio went well the whole time. So there we go. I got the link.
I don't know what it was like for people that were listening to us, but I enjoyed the conversation. You're always interesting to talk to. You're an incredibly intelligent.
I love talking to you.
Listen to and talk to.
It's easy to talk to you. And here's the thing, I know I'm scheduled to do more of these debates, and I will. And it's not that I don't mind doing the debates. I do. But talking to you, it's so much easier because here's the thing,
we don't argue.
Well, I don't even mind the arguing, but here's the thing. If me and you disagree, it's clear on what we're disagreeing about. When I talk, for example, it's like a slog. It's like a slog to get through. For example, we're talking about debating with people that seriously are trying to claim that the majority of the people rioting are Trump supporters. They're trying to make the argument.
It's just absurd.
Right. The people that are beating down the gates of the White House because they want to harm Donald Trump are Trump supporters. The people beating up a man for wearing a MAGA hat are Trump supporters. Right. So it takes you 20 minutes to be like, okay, let's go through this step by step. Right. That's what makes these debates so difficult. Right. It's just that I'm going in, again, like we talked about at the beginning of this video. We're arguing in good faith. We're arguing, and some people are, by the way, on the other side. But that's a disadvantage when it comes to the immediate strategicness of trying to win an argument or something, because they'll just make, how hard would it be for me to just deny reality? Like,
Yeah,
Trump
that's
said
what
when
I
the
was going to
looting
say.
starts, the shooting starts. No, he didn't. He never said that. Yeah, here's the article. No, he never said that. That's what it's
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. And whereas for you and I, like on those areas where we do have disagreement, I know, like, myself and SJG, we talk a lot, and we've had things where we've disagreed, but we don't disagree on what the facts are, and we don't disagree on what the
Exactly.
problems are. We just disagree on what the solution to the problem is, and that's it's much easier to have that argument because you're arguing in good faith, because you're both living in the same reality, the real one, the one that actually exists, as opposed to the leftist narrative one that has nothing to do with fact. And so when you're dealing with that, you have to go through and you have to know your facts. You have to be able to back up your facts and support them and prove them, because they live in a world that just doesn't exist. And you have to introduce them to the real world first before you can actually start to talk about the issues. So
Right. And
yeah,
I totally,
yeah,
like, the first time I debated this left wing streamer Destiny, he's a solid debater, and he's not as extreme as some other people, but I debated him on impeachment. And my entire argument with the whole impeachment thing was this: if there was a reason to investigate Obama and Biden's quid pro quo, then there was no reason for impeachment, right? Because the entire argument was, well, Trump's using things to investigate his political opponent. But if there's a reason to investigate, then there's no crime, right? Everybody knew that's what the impeachment was over. Was he trying to improperly investigate Joe Biden? That was it, right? I go into that debate and I say that, and he's like, no, that's not true. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, the impeachment is over the fact that Congress approved funds and Trump held it up. And I was like, well, literally no one's saying that. Yep, that's why he should be impeached. And I'm like, okay, but every president in the past 5 presidents have done that. That's whataboutism. And so I had to, it took me an hour to be like, do you understand that impeachment's political? Yes. So it's not a legal matter? Yes. And so therefore we should listen to the people impeaching Trump as to why they're impeaching him? Yes. And they're literally not saying that holding up funds is the reason for the impeachment? Yes. But that's why I think he should be impeached. So it's like, how can I have a good faith debate? It's like, you're just not in reality. It's the same, like, I've debated people on the documents with Michael Flynn. They've come out. The transcripts have come out. They show that Flynn did nothing wrong. And the people I'm debating are reading the same words as me saying, see, this proves I was right. And I'm like, no, it says the opposite. And they're just like, no. And so when you get into these debates, it just like, it drains you because you're like, oh my goodness. If you can't, the number one rule of debate is you have to agree on something to debate about. You have to. Yeah. Like, for example, it's hard to have a verbal debate if we don't understand each other's language. It's hard to have a debate if we don't have a topic that we're debating. So if I stand up and I'm like, cheese sandwiches are the best type of sandwich, and you're like, yeah, I think Secretariat was the best horse to ever race. That's not a debate. That's just 2 non sequiturs, right? But that's what happens with these people. And so it's just so draining, particularly when you got a debate where it's like, you have 7, 8 people and everyone's talking. And I'm not saying that individually the people were bad, but it's just so hard to get through that. So this is nice. Doing something like this is nice.
Just briefly before we go, that was one of the things I actually noticed in your debate that you were on recently, where you had a large group of people that were on you. I think it was meant to be an even number of people on each side.
Yeah, it didn't work out.
The fact that, but not only are they disingenuous in terms of what they sort of consider reality to be, or what they will accept reality being, but also just in the way that they will allow nuance in an argument when it suits them, but then they will reject nuance in the argument when it doesn't. And that's the kind of thing you have to go through, laying these ground rules that if something is okay to use in one circumstance, it's okay to use in all circumstances. If it's not okay to use in this circumstance, it's not okay to use, full stop. And you have to just go through these basic things because they're not interested in fairness.
Right.
They're not interested in truth. They're not interested in fairness. It's all about winning.
Well, right.
And that is a terrifying, like the last group of people that you want in a society to have power are the people who crave it.
Right.
Because they are the bad people. They are the ones who will do what needs to be done by any means necessary to get the power. Somebody like me, if you put me in charge, well, I mean, things might not necessarily be great either because I don't want the power, so I'm not going to use it, which can also be bad. But at least I'm not going to be an authoritarian asshole. I'm not going to shut down your speech. I'm not going to get you kicked out of your job. I'm going to say, no, look, let him be a wanker. If he wants to be a wanker, let him be a wanker. That's okay.
Right. And like one of the things I noticed, just real quick, I'm not in a hurry to leave. I don't know if you are. I just figured you'd.
It's mid-afternoon here.
That's
we'll
true.
Have to go reasonably soonish, but yeah.
one of the things you try to do when you're having a debate like that is you have to remember who your audience is. So, for example, when I went on a debate of that guy, Destiny, there was 9,000 people watching that debate. I would guess 8,999 of them hated me as soon as I opened my mouth because it's perceived. That's why I never write down I think I put discussion. I never put debate because I don't want my followers to think, oh, it's a debate and I'm a fan of Rob, so I'm cheering on Rob's side. That's not how I would like it to go. I hope that you think that the best idea was the best idea, regardless of who said it. But the very nature of, it's a debate, so his fans are going to agree with him, that's fine. But I knew that most of them were left-wing and would disagree with me, so I catered. I wasn't dishonest. Everything I said in that debate, I truly believe, but I selectively decided on what to talk about and tried to show that we have bridges that we could gap. And so I wanted concessions for the average person. In that debate, what I really wanted was for Destiny to say the riots aren't about unarmed black men being shot, and I support the riots. And he said that. That's it. That's all I wanted from him. It was like, thank you. That's exactly what I'm telling people on the right. This is exactly what you people are thinking. So, yeah. And he even went further than I wanted, where he said I got him to admit that it was about removing Trump from office. Okay, thank you. That's unbelievable. You just justified political violence to get rid of a guy you don't like as president. Okay, but I'm also trying to make that argument to his crowd. So the 8-person debate, one of the things I'm trying to do is have a good faith discussion, show people that I'm willing to have a good faith discussion with them, the ones I'm talking with, but also make a point to people that are watching outside the debate and show why I think my side's right. And so what I kept trying to tell them by the end of that debate was this: you might disagree with me. You might think this guy's an idiot, he's wrong. But I'm not going to listen to you tell me that I'm here in bad faith. Because they kept saying, you're obfuscating the issue. No, I'm not. I'm admitting there's a problem with black people being treated poorly in this country, or at least living in bad circumstances, right? And I want to address that. I'm just saying my way of addressing it's different than yours. You might think I'm wrong. That's fine. That's your right. But don't say that I'm deflecting from the problem. That's ridiculous. The problem was George Floyd was murdered, right? How do we solve that? The problem was police brutality. I have one way to go about it. You have another. And this is the problem, and I brought this up in that debate. And it was funny because I feel that Prime Case, who I actually think's a reasonable person, he made the argument for me, where I said, this is like when Eric Holder said that this nation's too cowardly to have a discussion about race. What Eric Holder really meant was, this country won't have a discussion based on race where they agree with me. Right? Because what Eric Holder is saying is, you have to agree that this country is systemically racist. You have to agree that white people are racist. Now we could have a discussion. And if you don't make those agreements, well, then you're too cowardly to have the discussion. But that's wrong. And literally, the response to that was, well, no, that's not what Eric Holder was saying. Actually, what Eric Holder was saying is that there's systemic racism in this country, and that the institutions are all racist against black people, and people don't want to talk about that. And I was like, yes, you just proved my point.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly what I'm saying. You're saying that's not a debate. That's saying I'll only talk to people that agree with me, and then maybe have a nuanced disagreement over here. And that's what I told them. I was like, they put 2 people on my side. Literally, the first question was, do you think Black Lives Matter? Or no, I'm sorry, do you support the protest? Who's going to say no? So I was the last one they asked, and so the other 2 Republicans were like, oh, of course. And it gets me, and I was like, yeah, I support the protest. The peaceful ones, I denounce every single one of the rioters, and I also disagree with the messaging of the protest that it is somehow racial. And they're like jaws hit the floor. And so by the end of it, I was like, what did you think this was going to be? That we were going to have 8 people just sitting on here like, oh, yeah, we all agree. That's the debate. You agreed to a debate. I'm not obfuscating by saying there could be other reasons. And so that's the point. Like, I'm debating on 2, and everyone is, even, it's not that, oh, I'm a genius, I'm debating on 2 levels. All of us always are. Like, me and yours discussion right now is a discussion between me and you, but it's also a discussion being heard by other people. And so you have it, you know that in the back of your head. Like, for example, if me and you were literally talking by ourselves in a room and no one else could see, we wouldn't have to explain certain things the way we're explaining it, because we understand each other, because we have a history with each other, and we've talked about things before. Right? But like with you, I'll have to say, well, you're from Australia. That's not an exposition that I would give if I'm talking to you and know other people. So we inherently, everybody knows, oh, there's different audiences that are watching this. So that's kind of what's going on in those debates but it's very taxing, because you can't just have a discussion based on, like, there's very little common ground that we could agree on. Like, And I'm sure you noticed this. In that debate, they said every single violent riot, every single violent action from the protesters, every one was a direct result of police hitting people with tear gas.
Yeah, it just no confluence with reality at all. There, that they are just it's just a fantasy world. They build a narrative that has no relationship to reality, and it is taxing. It is difficult to deal with that, because you have to kind of the real world, bringing in facts. And I mean, some of them will just, if you're debating a woman, obviously she's going to call it, patriarchal and
mansplaining.
A mansplainer anyway. So, that kind of takes care of that. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It's a weird world we're living in. And
it's I try. I'm not saying.
Not sure well,
we're not perfect, but I think that we try our best to be like. I think that it's pretty much a morally reprehensible position to say that you're supporting riots. I think that's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've debated at least 5 people last week that told me that, and I wasn't like, hey, go screw yourself. I was like, okay. Right? And I talked it through. Yeah, I'm not returned the same courtesy many times. I'm instantly labeled a racist. So I'm listening to you advocate for violence, and I'm doing you the courtesy of not saying, that makes you a pretty crappy person. Instead, I'm trying to continue the debate, because I'm like, it won't do any good if I'm just like, well, there are certain things that I would do that. Like if I'm debating a pedophile and they say, yeah, it's okay, I'd be like, that's the end of the debate. There's nothing more to say. But I could go on with you're supporting the right, I can go on. But we're not returned that same favor. I'm sure you feel the same way. You'd bring someone on and talk about race relations that says that the country or the West is systemic. That's fine. Say your piece. I'll disagree. I'm not even going to sit here and say, oh, you're immoral for suggesting that. I'll be like, hey, So I don't understand. Well, I do understand, but it's just like we said before. When your philosophy is by any means necessary, you could justify any sort of thing. So.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to that other cliche. For people like us, we look at people who just believe they're misinformed, whereas they believe that we're morally reprehensible.
Right.
And that's a difficult thing. So I actually do see the value not in rioting and burning things down, but in having rational discussions, because I think you can educate those people who disagree with this because they disagree because they don't know things, right? So burning stuff down doesn't do jack, right? It's not going to fix anything. Nobody learns anything from burning stuff down. Whereas if you believe that the people that you're fighting against are immoral or evil, then there's no point talking.
Well, and I do believe
is a waste of time, because you're not going to.
The leadership, that the establishment level at this point, I'm willing to say they're immoral. But yeah, the individual you're talking, it blew Republicans' minds when I ran in 2019. It blew their minds. The big story at the time was Ralph Northam in the blackface, and everybody was up in arms about AOC, And, oh man, all these stupid young people voting for AOC, just a bunch of morons living in mommy's basement, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, hey, you ought to hold back on that. And they were like, what? I was like, you don't like AOC, you want to make fun of her? Fine. I wouldn't be making fun of her supporters. And they're like, why? I was like, wouldn't you like them to vote for you at some point? Did you like it when Hillary Clinton called you a deplorable? So do you think that insulting these people is going to bring them, right? And so when I'm on those debates, what I'm trying to do is it's one thing to say things, but the way you carry yourself is also important. So I'm trying not to be a raving lunatic on there. I'm trying to be honest and give, and it's not me being fake, by the way. That's who I really am. It's maybe you'll convince me of something. I'm willing to listen. And so many, one of the problems I have with content creators on the right, and not all of them, but some, and it's true on the left even more, I would say, but is the unwillingness to have a conversation with someone who disagrees. There are a lot of people that are just screw those people. I don't like them. They're all immoral. I don't want to talk to them. Well, that's fine, but if your goal is actually making this country as good as possible, which is mine, and bringing people together, then I have to have those conversations. And the other thing is, the last thing I want to be is a hypocrite. If I'm going to complain about Twitter or YouTube censoring conservative voices, but I'm unwilling to talk to left-wing voices, how does that make me any better than them? So I try, but it's a slog, man. It's tough. I've had 6, 7 people email me this week. Do you want to debate me? Do you want to debate me on all sorts of topics? And I'm like, I have a life. I can't do this every night, maybe one a week. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on your debate. It's probably a good opportunity to wrap up now, I guess.
Yeah.
It must be getting late in your neck of the woods.
1 a.m. 1 a.m. So yeah, this I've been talking to Rational Wrongthink. I'll put his channel up again, so everyone please check that out. He's very smart. He's from Australia. It gives kind of a similar conservative view that I have with some different stuff added. But he's also an entertainer, and he does a lot of funny parody songs, music, and things like that. So please check out his channel. I'm sure we'll have him on back again. But thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, it was good to be here. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was fun as always. So I'll talk to you soon. And I'm sure we'll be texting each other as time goes on, too. So stay safe, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to the end. Sorry if there was a little lag with the video. Please consider sending me monies so that I could buy better equipment. But please consider also subscribing, liking, and sharing. And thanks so much, everyone. Have a good one.
Catch you guys.